Remakes have always been a contentious talking point in cinema, but it seems there has been more anxiety amongst audiences of how remakes are actually threatening the legacy of its predecessors. Disney in particular have been criticised for remaking their classic films. While it's hard to say they effaced the original films, the language used with the audience, especially when the character is race swapped for instance, suggests that they are challenging the canon. Film author Lucy Marsden outlines this paradigm, held by critics and audiences in her chapter Transnational Film Remakes and in her book Encore Hollywood Remaking French Cinema. In the book Transnational Film Remakes, she mentions how critics, in this case Thomas Like, analyse remakes as directly competing with other products of the same medium, and instead of creating new audiences for their source films, remakes typically seek to overshadow or even efface them. Marsden really reiterates that this is the dominant approach to the remake critique, posing a quasi-Oedipal relationship between the remake and the source text, a system of both admiration and competition. Take for instance the relationship between The Departed and the original Infernal Affairs. Infernal Affairs was hugely successful and thus being recognised by Hollywood, which led to the bidding war for the rights. However, The Departed's success at the Academy Awards mythologises the film as the epitome of Hollywood and represents Infernal Affairs as a failure that could not reach the height of its success. Daniel Herbert delves into the relationship of these films in his dissertation, Transnational Film Remakes, Time, Space, Identity. Here he says, in winning several Academy Awards, The Departed now represents the very epitome of Hollywood as the very height of American cinematic achievement, and Infernal Affairs was unable to gain the same kind of success as its remake. In Encore Hollywood, Marsden also describes the view on America's approach to transnational remakes as a very real and very current manifestation of American cultural imperialism, and condemning the remake of vampirization, for draining the lifeblood of French culture by powerful Hollywood producers. So they outline the remake as almost a tool towards industry dominance, portraying Hollywood as using remakes to efface and debase culture to ultimately control the global industry, as represented by The Departed's success at the Oscars. But what does an American remake that tries to efface the original look like? Let's take the Old Boy films as an example, and we can analyse how the remake Americanised the original. Firstly, for some context, Old Boy 2003 is a South Korean film made by Park Chan-wook, and the American Old Boy 2013 is directed by Spike Lee. And the central premise of these films is that the protagonist has been locked in a room for 15 years with no human interaction, and is then suspiciously released and must find out why. Let's compare a short clip of scenes where the villain of the story reveals to the protagonist why he released him.
One of the longest running shows on television, but it had only a single viewer. You.
One of the most notable things is the characterisation, the villain and the hero. In the original, the antagonist, Yu Ji-tae, is played by Lee Woo-jin, is a much younger and better looking subjectively to the protagonist, Oh Dae-soo, played by Choi Min-sik. Compare this to the American remake. Sharlto Copley's portrayal of Adrian Doyle Price is almost cartoonishly villainous compared to Josh Brolin's Joe Doucette. Already we can see the American version establishes an apparent good versus evil dynamic between the two characters, just based on their look. This is expanded on further in the story. Joe Doucette and his actions are significantly more sympathetic than Oh Dae-soo's. Alternatively, Price is significantly more unsympathetic than Yu Ji-tae. This is mainly due to the themes around sexuality. Park Chan-wook seems well read in psychopathology, which comes through in Old Boy, with his story containing Oedipal elements as well as visualising Jungian archetypes, but most importantly, this exploration of human sexuality. While it is uncomfortable compared to Old Boy 2013 that avoids these discussions by characterising the sexual relationships in such an alienating way, the twist becomes so much more tame and trying to maintain the original's edge through emphasis on violence, which does not work to the same event. This epitomises the remake as trying to popularise it by subsidising the taboo elements and instead exaggerating the gratifying violent aspect, which is generally less interesting. Another point is, the South Korean Old Boy is a visceral portrayal of urbanised Korea, with slick black suits, glimmering skyscrapers, quick stylish editing and moody lighting, but it's supplemented with a dark, grimy underbelly that solidifies the view in 2000s Korean culture. And this urbanised Korea is representative of the growing success of the Korean film industry. Oldboy represented a new, sleek and punchy cinema industry, which its importance can't be understated. If we recall back to Marsden and the term vampirization, the idea that parallels the word of face, the remake took the original and not only deprived it of its visual style, edge and ambiguity, but also its culture. And like what The Departed did, it was trying to efface the original, which is actually an industry statement about dominance. It questioned the straightforward linear trajectories established by this critique, going on to posit in their place a genealogical approach which will replace the vertical route which led from authentic original to debased copy with circles of bifurcations of intertextuality and hybridity. Marsden really reiterates this is the dominant approach to remake critique, not hers. Instead, she poses a mode of intertextuality where remakes add to the dialogue started by the original. Marsden constantly refers to the simplification of the remake criticism and actually the hypocrisy of it. Remakes are not always particularly enjoyable, nor do they necessarily achieve great profit at the box office, yet although they share the same attributes with many other cultural artefacts, they are subjected to the same uniform hostility rather levelled at the latter. In the book Transnational Film Remake, she does an in-depth analysis of the film and book A Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. She brings up how the American cable network aired the mini television series leading up to the release of the American remake, and promotional materials were embezzled with the words from the international best-selling trilogy, going on to question the claim how remakes must efface the original. The remake further spoke to the original by maintaining Scandinavian culture, being set in Sweden and embracing the Nordic noir genre. So she poses the idea of hybridity and shows how The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo incorporates the relationship of its predecessors. So if we view Oldboy from this new perspective, suddenly the remake seems much less distasteful. For a start, the South Korean Oldboy is an adaptation from the comic manga, so it should be treated as a remake itself. But both films don't try and hide their comic origins, but the original film relishes in this over-the-top style as if it was straight out from a comic. Matt Zoller Sites has an interesting review on robertebert.com, as it's one of the few positive reviews of the American film. He puts it best as, the composition in Lee's movie has such a painfully or illustrated quality that they might as well have thick black lines marking off the edge of the frame, suggested a painted quality similar to a comic book. If we are talking about intertextuality, the most important thing to mention is how deeply rooted the films are in postmodernity. The Korean film plays on the revenge genre and subverts the expectation of the audience who are familiar with the genre, or even just the comic, whereas the American film uses references to its former to foreshadow, as well as using other friendly references to the Korean film. So while my original analysis suggests that the American remake was trying to efface its predecessor, Marsden's mode reveals its behaviour of intertextuality and dialogue. With that said, Marsden doesn't completely rule out the idea of effacing. She only attacks the reductive critique of foreign art and the Hollywood copy, but she encourages a more holistic view. Spectatorship should never be defined as a single gesture. It should be altered according to the moment of space of consumption and the age, gender, race, sexuality and class of the individual viewer. She gives an interesting description in American remakes of French films in her book Encore Hollywood, and also brings up the similarities between contemporary postmodernism in film and remakes, suggesting all films in a way are remakes. Also, going back to Daniel Herbert's dissertation, he talks about The Departed and Infernal Affairs in their relation to globalisation. When Marsden says some remakes efface the original, it's due to context, not because of their nature. So maybe the recent discourse is not about preserving beloved media, but instead is about perceived tensions and political ideologies. So while Marsden criticises, there is some truth that a film must efface the original. Yes, Oldboy doesn't hide from its comic book origins, but it vastly overshadowed it. And going back to the films I mentioned, it's The Departed and Oldboy that have gone to the biggest heights. Even the example Marsden gives as counterpoint, A Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, underperformed, and that's the same with the American remake of Oldboy. Those two seem quite similar to their kind of predecessors. So perhaps remakes have to efface to be successful, and even if you consider that all films are remakes by nature, successful ones overshadow their predecessors, as the ones parallel to the original don't reach the same heights.